Good morning. Okay, hold on. There's my lesson. It is Sunday, October 11th. This is my Sunday school class. We're in the book of Genesis. We're just finished the 12th chapter last week. We're doing the 13th chapter of Genesis this week. Just going through methodically because that's the best way to learn is just start at the beginning and A, then B, then C, then D. Um, so far in our story, God created the earth, created man, and said basically to man, if you stay in relationship with me, you can have all this wonderful stuff. You can stay in this garden and just don't eat of that one tree, but those other 1,000 trees, go ahead and do whatever. And it's all for you. And of course, uh, man's too curious. Like, well, what if I touch that? Don't touch that fire. But what if I do? So Adam breaks his relationship with God. And God is still trying to demonstrate to man the best thing for you to stay in relationship with me. I'm the one who created the heavens and the earth. I'm the one who created the universe. And so if you stay in relationship with me, you will be successful, you will prosper, things will go well with you because I designed it all. I know how it all works. Um, so just simply saying that didn't seem to be enough for man. So God demonstrated, well, here are the consequences if you don't do it. Because sometimes you can say, don't touch that fire, but sometimes you have to go ahead and let them burn themselves and go, oh, okay, that's why you said that. So he punishes man because man becomes exceedingly wicked. And there's the flood with Noah, right? These are the consequences. Let's see if that will work. No. Right after the flood, like 2 generations, Nimrod creates the Tower of Babel, and we'll create our own gods because we don't like this God. He doesn't do. And that's kind of how we are today, right? We don't like this God, so we'll create our own gods so we can get the answers right when we need them. So that's how man is. We want to be God. That was the original temptation, right? From the serpent to Eve. Well, God knows that when you eat that, you'll be like Him, and you'll be like the gods, and that's like our temptation. We want to determine our own destiny. We we want to determine what's good and what's evil, and 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 God's already set that up. So that's the dilemma. Do we go with what God has already set up, or do we try to create our own universe? So uh, that obviously is not going to prosper us. Well, obvious to us, but apparently it's not obvious to a lot of people that doing it our way is not going to work. So God's third way to reach us was let me find someone to demonstrate what it's like to follow God. Let me find a person and his whole family line. I will bless them and I will demonstrate to the rest of the world. That's why God has his chosen people. He's chosen them to be the example. He hasn't chosen them to prosper more than anybody else, but he's chosen them to be the example. I'm going to bend over backwards to bless you, to put up with whatever you do, because I want an example in the earth of what it's like for a people to follow after God. That's why God chose the Jews. Um, and today, the church, we're to be that same example to the world. Here's what it's like to follow the Lord and not follow what the world says, not prosper in the way the world says you should prosper, to not follow after the world's edicts, which is, somebody hits you, you better hit them back. No, it says if somebody hits you in one cheek, turn off them the other cheek. It's a whole different way. But God's saying, if you do it my way, you'll prosper. And I want a people where I can demonstrate what that means. So he picks Abraham and says, from your family line, that's who I'm going to use to demonstrate to the world what it's like to have a people who follows after God. And that's it. It's like this is my final way of reaching out. I've used incentives like look at all the trees in the garden, and you still went the other way. I've used consequences. This is what will happen if you don't do it my way. With the flood, you still went your own way. So this is it. I'm going to use this example. It reminds me of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. Let me find someone, and then I'll invest myself in this person I apologize for anyone under 30 who may not have any idea what that reference is, but these professors had this theory. If we could find someone and we could take anybody and we could teach them how to walk and to talk and refinement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they picked someone not because this person was any special. And Abraham, there was nothing special really about, well, there was only one quality that Abraham had. I'll remind you what that was. But no, there was nothing else really special about Abraham. He came from a line of people who were worshiping different gods as opposed to the God. And and in My Fair Lady, they choose this woman. There's nothing special about her, but they have this theory that if you can really focus on someone, you can change their life. And God, that's God, but God's not. It's not a theory to God. He knows He can do it. So I'm going to now choose a people to be an example, and He picks Abraham. So we're just going to review quickly chapter 12, what we went over last week. Why did God choose Abraham? In Genesis 18:19, it says, "For I have known him." And again, God knows us. God already, before we're born, God knows our choices, our personality, if we're shy or bold or whatever. He knows us. So he says, "I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him." That I'm choosing Abraham because he will command his children and his household after him, and their children and their children and their children, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do the righteousness and to do righteousness and justice. That like that's the one quality he had. He was going to command his children and say, "You must do this," and then they would follow, and his grandchildren and his great grandchildren, his great grandchildren, to follow the way of the Lord. That's the one quality that he had. Other than that, Abraham was just as innocent as any of us are when we first come to the Lord. He didn't, in fact, God spends chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 teaching faith to Abraham, teaching him how to follow him. And it's the same rules that he does for us. We can follow along with what God taught Abraham and see that that's the same thing that he's teaching us, laying foundation upon foundation upon foundation. These are when you come to God, these are the exact things that God, and the frustrating thing about God is he does not just pass you to the next step until you learn that lesson. So you can be in third grade for 7 years. You don't get to just go on to fourth grade because, well, you're old now. God leaves you at that level until you learn the lesson. Then he moves you to the next level. And then when you learn that lesson, he moves you to the next lesson. So that's the only, I wish God would just, God has been 7 years now. He said, "Well, sorry, you haven't learned that lesson yet, so I'm not moving to the next step until you learn it." Because God's not going anywhere. He's patient. It's like, I've been God for a long time now, so I'm not in any hurry. So I'm just going to wait. That's what teachers say. I'll wait until you learn that lesson. So these are the lessons that God taught Abraham in chapter 12. We're just going to review them quickly, and then we're going to go into chapter 13. Lesson 1 was, Abraham, you must separate from your past. So he tells Abraham, get out of your country and get away from your family. So we have to separate ourselves from those things in our past that are contrary to God and contrary to his way. So he bids us to do that. And until we do that, we're not able to go into the next lesson, because there are things, again, to the best of our ability, the things that we know of, the people that we know of that are separating. Obviously, there are going to be things way in our past that may take a while for us to get over, but we're not even aware of those things. But there are some obvious people, some obvious places that we shouldn't go, some obvious people we shouldn't contact, that God says, you need to get away from that situation if you're going to go into your next step, because that situation is too much of an influence to you. It's too familiar to you, and it's too easy for you to go and rely on those old habits, those old ways of doing things. So if you want to progress, you have to separate yourself from those old habits, from those old people, those old places, so you can move to the next step. Lesson 2, Abraham, you're going to have to walk by faith. So he's introducing him to the concept of faith. Abraham didn't know what that meant, but he tells him, get from your father's house and go to a land that I will show you. So he doesn't tell him where he's going. He just basically says, start walking. And Abraham's up in Syria, and he walks over into what we would call Canaan land, Palestine, Israel. But at the time, it's Canaan land, because that's the clan, the family of Canaan lives there in that land. And he just starts walking, And God's not telling him exactly where he's going and exactly how it's going to happen, exactly how many steps. He wants him to just trust, like, I will let you know. And God does that. He gives us a little bit to go on and he makes us start walking. And then once you get to a certain place, and he says, okay, now I want you to go to the next pace. And then you just got to trust. You got to trust. So you get that job offer. Hey, and or somebody tells you, hey, I think there's an opening over there. And you, ooh, should I do that? But I don't know anything about it. But I've never done that before. Remember, and God's like, just trust. Just go there. Because when you get there, you'll find out that there's somebody there who's willing to train you. But if you stay in your house, you'll never know that. So there's certain things that we have to go ahead and take the step. And then when we take the step, we find out, oh, it's different than what I thought. Here's someone here that's ready to help me. But sometimes we're afraid to take the step. And so God wants us to start moving, and he's teaching us faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's evidence of things not seen. So we don't know yet what it's going to look like, but we trust God and we go ahead and start that Bible study. Well, gee, there's only like 3 people, but God says, just go ahead and do it. Just go ahead and start it. I can even think about, I had never taught online. I never taught on Facebook. I didn't know what any of that was about. And God's like, well, just do it. Just start teaching. I thought, was anybody out there listening?
I'm not.
See, my wife's not. So, but sure enough, somebody was. But if you wait to find out, let me write 3,500 letters and find out who's going to listen to me. God's like, just take a chance. Just turn on your computer and start talking, and then I'll do the rest. But you have to do the first step. So he's teaching Abraham faith. Okay, I'm supposed to just speeding through this review of chapter 12. Lesson 3, God will reward your faithfulness. So you got to do it first, but then God rewards it. So he says, if you do it, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. So there'll be a reward for it. So fortunately, it's not like just start doing stuff and who knows what will happen. He says there'll definitely be a reward if you follow and listen to me. Lesson 4, God wants to have us to have faith in the invisible. So Abraham passed through the land, and so he's in Canaan. He says he's passing through the land to the place of Shechem, and the Canaanites were then in the land. And then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants, I'm going to give this land. And he's thinking, first of all, I don't have any descendants. I've been married all this time to Sarah. We don't have any descendants. But there's Canaanites. There's 100,000 Canaanites, and there's one of me and my wife, and we have 300 servants. But there's 100,000 people. And God wants us to have faith in the invisible. I just want you to just go there. I'm telling you that you need to go ahead and claim this block. And I know it seems impossible, or you need to go ahead and claim that job, or you need to go ahead and claim that thing that he's speaking to you. Now, Abraham didn't go somewhere and say, hey, God, I want this place. And God's like, okay, I'll do whatever you say. So it doesn't work in reverse. We don't tell God, but when he speaks to us and he says, yes, you're going to be able to go to Harvard. Like, what? Yes, I just want you to believe. So start studying now, and I want you to start applying. And he wants us to have faith in the impossible, faith in the invisible. You can't see how it's going to happen, but when he speaks it to your heart, he wants us to believe. So he's telling Abraham, even though you have no idea how I'm going to do it. It's just you and your wife and your servants. I'm going to give you this land. You go, okay. So in Romans 4, verse 17, is a very familiar passage. It says, God who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. He calls those things that are not as though they are. So God says, this is yours. And you're thinking, no, it's not. That belongs to that person over there. Nope, I'm giving this to you. God calls those things that are not as though they were. That's how he starts talking about it. He began to call Abraham and tell him, you're going to be the father of many nations. Well, I don't even have any kids. Because God can see the future. He can see it. We can't. So he wants us to have faith in what he's explaining to us. So once he got to Shechem, and then God finally spoke, and again, Abraham's nervous because God said, I want you to start walking. So he's walking. He walked for an hour. He walked for 3 hours. He walked actually for 300 miles. Like he walked and walked and walked and walked. And God finally spoke to him and said, this is it. Because I'm sure Abraham's just like us. At a certain point, he's thinking, I've been walking. Maybe I made that up. And we think that. Maybe I made that up. Because look, God hasn't said anything to me again. So maybe, and then God finally says, okay, this is it. So he builds an altar there in Shechem. And Shechem's about halfway through Canaan because he starts in the north and he's going. I always picture California, from north to the south. So he starts in the north and he's like halfway through. And then God finally says, okay, this is the land I'm going to give to you. So he builds an altar to the Lord who'd appeared to him. And then he keeps walking because he's got cattle and things like that. And they ate up all the grass there. So, well, I need to keep walking. So they go to the next place. He says, and he moved from there to the mountains east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent this time with Bethel on the west and a place called Ai, which is A-I. I think it's called I, maybe called Ai, on the east. And there, Captain, there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called on the name of the Lord. So he did something different in Bethel than he did in Shechem. He actually pitched a tent and said, okay, this looks good. This kind of green, it's nice. I can stay here for a while. So he pitches a tent. He builds an altar, and he calls on the name of the Lord. Now, God doesn't say anything to him. He just stops there. But here he began to call on the name. He's actually beginning to, he's not waiting for God to say something. He's now calling on God, praying to God, asking God for guidance. And they say it specifically there in Bethel. Now, interestingly, it wasn't called Bethel at the time that Abraham was there. It got that name later. Beth El. Beth means house, and El is the name for God. And so it's Beth El, house of God. But it was called Luz, L-U-Z, at the time. And I got its name, but something, this is interesting. There was something about that place that he thinks, I don't know what it is, but I need to stop here. You might have that same feeling. You see some person. I don't know what it is about that person, but I think I'm supposed to talk to them or help them. Or I don't know what it is about this place, but I think I'm supposed to have my lunch right here, you know? And then later somebody comes by and drops by and you strike up a friendship, and you could look back in your life 20 years later and go, oh my goodness, that's so interesting. I just felt like having my lunch at that place. And then I ran into this person and, they've been my best friend for 20 years or something. And that's what it was about Beth El. He didn't know, like, why am I here? I think I'm just going to stop here and pitch a tent. Well, later, his grandson, Jacob, is on the run. And because he's stolen his brother's birthright, Jacob's not really believing in God. He's just believing in birthrights. He's not like, oh, I know there's a God in heaven. And it's like, no, I want that. I want that birthright. And I'm going to steal it. And now his brother's mad at him and he's on the run. And he's really like, because his brother's big and scrawny. And the way they describe big and scrawny, big and strong, the way they describe Jacob, his brother liked to go out in the field and work. But Jacob, he'd like to stay in the tents. And there's a different, so he's not at all like Esau, his brother, his twin brother. And he's thinking Esau's going to kill me. And so I need to be able to run. And he's panicked. And so he stops at this place, L-U-Z, the same place where his grandfather had stopped, who just felt like, I think this place is important. I don't know what it is. So Jacob stops there. And that's when he has his dream about Jacob's ladder. And God appears to him for the first time in his life. God appears to him in his panic, in his, I don't know what I'm going to do. And God appears and says, hey, I'll be your God. I'm going to be the God. I'm going to protect you. And in Genesis chapter 28, so I'm just skipping ahead just to explain this one area that Abraham just felt like he should stop in. Abraham chapter 28, verse 16 says, then Jacob awoke from his sleep. Remember, this is Jacob's ladder. There's angels going up and down this ladder. He has this vision. And he says that surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it. So he didn't stop there because God said stop there. He didn't know God was in that place. There was just something about it where he stopped. That's where his grandfather had stopped. So let me go, where grandfather stopped, and I'll pitch a tent where my grandfather pitched a tent. But that's where God spoke to him. He said, God, I didn't even know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? Like awesome, like fearful, like, oh my goodness. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. This is the Beth El. So it became called Beth El from then on, and that's where Jacob made his first contact with God. And God was eventually going to change his name to Israel and give them that land. And Abraham didn't know that. And sometimes we don't know why God tells us to do something. We don't know. We don't see the immediate reward for it. Why did God tell me to do that? I really think it was God, and I really felt like I was supposed to do that. But there is a reason. Abraham doesn't know about that experience with Jacob. Abraham has passed away by this time. He doesn't know this is the place that's going to turn Jacob's life around and create everything that God had promised Abraham as far as his descendants eventually inhabiting that place. Abraham didn't know it and never ever really saw it. But there was a reason for it. And sometimes we just have to trust there's a reason why God is telling me to do this. I don't know why he's telling me to do it, but I'm going to do it. And if you don't see the immediate answer, that doesn't mean you didn't hear God. That just means the answer's for a different time. So, you can feel stupid. I really think God told me to call that person, or I really think God told me to do, but I don't. And sometimes there's not an instant result. They don't go, oh my God, it's the Lord. They don't say anything.
Get off my phone.
Yes, that's what they say. Get off my. Why are you calling me? Stop calling. But you don't know why you were told, but you felt strongly you're supposed to do something, and you do it, and there is a reward. It may be down the road. You may be like Abraham and not ever know, but that word you said, that thing you did, that person you ran into, whatever you did, that might be for them. It may not be for you. That meeting you had, you think, well, nothing came of that meeting, but you may have said something to change that person's life, and you may not ever know. Abraham had no idea that what happened there, but that's the incident that turned everything around and turned Jacob around. That's the place. So he's in Beth El, and although at the time it's called Luz, and he builds an altar to the Lord, and he calls on them in the place. I just feel like this is a special place, but I don't know why it is. Okay, then lesson 5. God's going to force you to be patient. He's just going to force you to learn patience. Here's what patience. Here's the patience. We plant the seed in the ground, and nothing is happening, and we want to dig up the seed, because we don't see anything. We don't see anything. But what's happening underneath the surface that we can't see is that seed is dying, and it breaks open, and little roots are going into the ground, but we don't see anything. And this is called the patience period. The Bible says, let patience have its perfect work, because there is something that God is doing in us or doing around us when he's asking us to be patient, and we don't see anything, but there's something happening underneath the surface that's going on. There are roots that are taking place. And so finally we see that little plant come up out of the ground, and now we can see the results of it. And we don't need to be patient anymore at that point. I don't mean we're impatient, but that's not what's required. There's a different thing that's required from that point once we kind of see the fruit of our labor. But there's a whole period of time where we don't see anything. That doesn't mean anything's happening. So Abraham's there and nothing's happening. He's built his tent, and there's a famine in the land. It says, now there's a famine in the land, and Abraham goes down to Egypt. So he's there for a while. He's finally pitched his tent in Bethel, and everything slowly dries up. Okay, I thought God sent me here, but all my resources are drying up. So he goes down to Egypt, because that's the only place where there's food. That's the only place where there's sustenance. And he's got like 300 servants he's got to feed, and all these cattle. So he moves away, and you think, I thought God gave me that land. I thought I was supposed to stay in Canaan, but the circumstances are moving me to Egypt. So I guess I gotta go. And that's that patient period where he's not seeing anything. He's not seeing anything, but that doesn't mean God's not working under the surface. So he gets there. What we learned last week is that he didn't know that God would protect him in Egypt. These are things that Abraham didn't know, because there was gods of different regions. So the God that spoke to him in Syria and said, I'm going to give you this land in Israel, he didn't know if that same God, if his reach reached all the way to Egypt. He didn't know. And we don't know that. We know that God in church, God is like, oh, I can feel his presence. But is God with you when you have to go to the courthouse? Is God with you when you're going to CVS pharmacy? Is he with you at all these other places? We have to learn that God is still God there. He's just as glorious as he is in church. He's God everywhere. And sometimes we don't think that, so we put on the different personality. We have our church personality, and then we have our personality when we go into the world, and we're like a different person. So Abraham puts on a different person. He tells Sarah, look, it's going to happen when the Egyptians see you because you're good looking. They're going to say, ooh, that's his wife. And then they're going to kill me, and they're going to let you live. Now, God has already promised him that that's not going to happen. But while he's in Egypt, he's thinking, well, God's not going to, I don't know that this God can protect me in Egypt. So he had to learn God is God in Egypt too. He also didn't know that God was fulfilling his promise through Sarah. He didn't, because he tells Sarah, say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So they let them take you, Sarah, but I got to make it back to Canaan so that God can fulfill his promise. And he didn't know that God was like, no, Sarah's part of this. But he's thinking, I've been married to her for years. She hadn't done nothing. But that doesn't mean anything to God. So we don't know how God is going to do something. And so we have to be careful because we say, oh, I don't need that. Or no, that may be the very thing that God is needing that you're trying to throw away. And that's something that God's going to use. Well, the good news is you can't stop God's plan. There are God's conditional will where he says, if you do this, then I will do this. And sometimes God just comes and says, this is what I'm going to do. And we don't have a part to play in it. We can't stop it. He's telling us, I am going to use you in this way. And he's just going to do it. And so even though Abraham gave Sarah away, God was planning on using Sarah. So just quickly, he brought these plagues on Pharaoh, right? And he says he plagued his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. It says because of Sarah, because you were doing wrong. You did wrong. You sent Sarah away, and that's why I'm plaguing Pharaoh's house. And Pharaoh comes to him and says, dude, why didn't you tell me that this was your wife? What's wrong with you? And it turns out Abraham was wrong. That they wouldn't have killed him. Because when they found out that Sarah was his wife, they didn't kill him. That's the opportunity. They would have said, well, I'm gonna kill you now because I'm mad. You allow plagues to come in. If you're dead, your God will stop punishing me. So, but that's not what happened. When he found out it was his wife, he let her go, and in fact blessed him because he'd already blessed him. He'd already said, in exchange for your sister, I'll give you all this stuff. Well, he thinking that it was his sister, but when he found it was his wife, he says, you can keep all that stuff. And it says, and so Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him. This is in Genesis chapter 12, verse 20. And then they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. He let him keep all the stuff that he gave him. He didn't get mad at him. Now, let's make sure we don't learn the wrong lesson here. Okay? Sometimes when God is merciful and despite our mistakes, because here's the lesson, God is bigger than our mistakes. When we mess up, once God has decided he's going to do something, he's still going to do it. Our mistake doesn't stop God's plan for our life. Abraham giving Sarah away, God didn't go, oh man, I had so much planned. I was going to wow, you really messed it up. Oh, well, maybe. He just said, let me stop this. And got Abraham back on track. We can't mess up what God has planned for our life. So when God is merciful and he moves in despite our mistakes and still in his sovereign will make something happen, let's not learn the wrong lesson. For example, let's say you get mad at somebody and get upset and go out drinking, and then on your way you're driving home and you're drinking and mad and you're not paying attention. You get in this terrible car accident, end up in the hospital. Then you find out a friend of yours is in the hospital bed next to you, and you witness to that person and they get saved. The wrong lesson is, well, I guess I was supposed to get drunk. and have an accident and almost killing myself and end up in the hospital because look what God did. Look how God blessed. So I guess I was supposed to do that. So next week I'm gonna get drunk again. Let's not learn the wrong lesson. Just because God worked it out doesn't mean that what we did was right. It means God is sovereign. Despite our mistake, God still is going to work it out. So we can't look at our mistake and say, well, let me just keep repeating that mistake. Because here, what God wanted you to find, because you would have gotten the phone. So let's say you had just gone home instead of gotten mad and gotten drunk and had an accident. If you'd gone home, you would have got a phone call saying, oh, your friend's in the hospital. And the next day, you would have gone to visit your friend and witnessed to them, and they would have gotten saved. God didn't need you to have a car accident in order to get you in the hospital so you can witness that person. You could have just gone and visited your friend, and the same thing would have happened. So sometimes we think just because God blesses, and we say, oh well, I guess because I've heard this. Well, obviously we were supposed to do that terrible thing. No, God would have done it anyway. He had a way that could have happened that would have saved you all that pain. But the good news is you're not going to stop what God is contending. He was intending for you to witness to that person. So like Jonah, okay, you think you can go the other direction. He's going to swallow you up and then spit you out where you're supposed to be. So you're going to end up where God wants you to be. But you can go willingly and happily, or you can get swallowed up in circumstances and end up there. But you're still going to end up there. But that doesn't mean Jonah wasn't supposed to say, well, clearly I'm supposed to always rebel against God and get swallowed up by fish. And that's how no. It's just that he's merciful. He's merciful, and we end up in his will. So we just want to be careful not to learn the wrong lesson from that. The good news is our mistakes can't stop God, but let's not look at the mistake and just keep repeating it over and over. Okay, so now we are in Genesis chapter 13. So that was the review. Genesis 13, lesson 7. Go back to the place of promise. If you haven't heard from God for a while, go back where he first spoke to you. Go back to the place of promise. Say, okay, maybe I've gotten far from where what God intended. Let me go back to what did God originally say to me? Let me just study what God first spoke to me. And because maybe I've gone in a funny direction, because Abraham's in Egypt. Was he supposed to stay in Egypt? No. And this is a very important thing that we got to remember, because the children of Israel stayed in Egypt and ended up slaves. So just because God sends you to Egypt for a minute doesn't mean you're supposed to stay there. So it says in Genesis chapter 13, verse 1, then Abraham went up from Egypt, and he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, and he went to the south, and that means he went back up to the south of Canaan. Because again, Moses is telling this story to them. They're in Canaan, so he uses certain directions, north, south, because they're reading this and they're hearing it while they're in Canaan. So he went to the south. He's saying, like, and he went to San Diego. He went from Mexico back up to San Diego, then to the south. But he went back. He could have said, ooh, look what happened in Egypt. I got all this money. Look how God blessed me in Egypt. And I should stay here. No, you need to go where God had told you to go and wait for further instructions. So Abraham, verse 2 of Genesis chapter 13. So Abraham was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. So he went back there because this was the last time that I called on the name of the Lord. This is the place where I'd worship God and got direction. So let me go back there so I can hear from God again and wait for further instructions. So he went to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So again, he's praying to God. He's calling on his name for direction, for guidance. Again, okay? So he'd done that before, and then a famine came, and that moved him to Egypt. That famine was of God, because in Egypt, God really blessed him through Pharaoh. And Pharaoh would have blessed him anyway. God, if had he just gone on, he didn't have to say and lie to Pharaoh about his sister. Pharaoh would have blessed him. God would have worked it out that Pharaoh blessed him, because this Pharaoh saw Abraham's faith in his God and believed in that. And you'll have friends, maybe they're not that God-fearing, or maybe they think they're agnostic, but in time of trouble, they'll call you up and say, will you please pray for me? Will you please pray? Because they can see your faith. They can see your faith. And so they want you to pray. And that's where this Pharaoh was, which is important. because later there's a different king that tries to bless Abram and he doesn't accept it. He accepts the blessing from Egypt, but not from this other king, and there's a reason why. Okay, so he calls him the name of the Lord. So why did God make Abraham rich? Why uh, is that important to God that everybody be rich? No. Okay, so here's the deal. God has made all these promises, these invisible promises to Abraham. You're going to be a mighty nation, and people will bless you, and you're going to be a blessing to them, and you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And it's all these invisible things that Abraham can't see that God's promising him if you just do what I say. So um, I heard someone explain it this way, and I really liked it. If I went to a church service and there's a minister preaching and he points to some of the congregation, says, listen, if you come up here, I want to pray for you. So the person comes up and he says, you've got this incurable blood disease. And like, I do? Yes, I can see it in the spirit. You've got it. And then I'm going to lay hands on you and pray for you and it'll be gone. So he lays hands on him and prays for him and says, now it's gone. And the person's thinking, I don't know that I ever had it. So how do I know that it's gone? And it could be gone, but that's like an invisible thing. I'm supposed to believe you that I had this invisible disease and that now it's gone. And it could be, but where's the proof? How would I know? So let's say it happened this way. He calls him up and says, you've got this invisible disease. God has revealed that to me. And I'm going to lay hands on you. And then as a sign to you, your hair is going to turn bright green. And so I pray for you and Lord, heal them of this disease. And sure enough, your hair turns bright green. Well, now there's a sign. Okay, well, something happened because my hair turned bright green. So even though I couldn't see it, here's a visible sign that this man, that what he's saying is that might really be true. Because look what happened. Okay, so for Abram, God needed to give Abram a visible sign. So I'm going to make you very wealthy. Here's a visible sign. Not that it's God, like everyone must be filthy rich on the earth, and that's how God blesses Abraham. This was a sign specifically for Abraham. I'm going to make you wealthy so that you can, because you're trusting in me that I'm giving you this land. You're making moves and doing things that seem impossible. I'm telling you, you're going to have all of California will be yours. Really? So all of Canaan is going to be yours. And there's no way for Abram to know if any of these things are ever going to happen because he's saying, I'm going to make you a great nation. Well, he's not going to ever see those things. People will call you blessed. Well, he's never going to see that. So why should I keep trusting this person who's promising things that I cannot see, that I will never see? So God says, I'm going to give you a visible sign now. This is a sign. I'm going to make you wealthy now so that you can believe that this other thing, I'm going to turn your hair bright green now so that you believe that this other thing that I'm telling you is true. So he makes him wealthy. And he goes back. So now he leaves Egypt and he's incredibly wealthy. And then he goes back to Bethel and calls on the name of the Lord. Now we're still in Genesis chapter 13. It says, Lot also went with him. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, because he blessed Lot too. Like that Pharaoh just gave them a whole bunch of stuff, right? Now the land was not able to support them that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not now dwell together. Lesson 8, more money, more problems. You didn't know it said that in the Bible, but it do. So, and it's interesting because sometimes we think, hey, and listen, there are problems that a little bit of money could solve. Like you might have an immediate problem in your life. I need to pay this car bill, or I totally understand that. But we also think if I was just fabulously wealthy, I wouldn't have any problems. That's not true. There are people who are fabulously wealthy who now have to be concerned with security all the time. Get you a Rolex, get you a really, like when I had a cheap phone, nobody bothered me. Once I got this expensive phone, I got to be afraid somebody's going to rob me. Now that I'm really rich, I got to be afraid somebody's going to kidnap my children and ransom them. There are things that there are pressures and things that go along with being very wealthy. There are a different set of problems than when you're poor, but just because you're wealthy doesn't mean you don't have any problems. I taught in a very rich neighborhood. And I thought, oh, these people, they're all really, really wealthy, so they have no problems. And oh my goodness, they had problems I'd never heard of before because they were so rich. I remember this girl came to school complaining because her father said to her, look, if you ever run away, here's a credit card, it's got $100,000 on it. So if you ever run away, I don't want you to become a prostitute, so use this credit card. Now, that's something I never had run into in my experience. But she was so mad and angry. I hate my father. He gave me this credit card and he told me, because she interpreted it as, I don't care if you run away. I just don't want you to become a prostitute. And that's something that wasn't going on in South Central. People weren't like pissed that the pads were giving them $100,000 credit cards. That was a different problem. So these kids had different problems than the poor neighborhood that my church was in. So yes, Abraham learned lesson 8: more money, more problems. So they went back to Bethel, and the first time he was there, Bethel was like great. He pitched his tent, but now he's there. He's got so many cattle and so much stuff, and that he got in Egypt. There's not enough grass for them to feed. So somebody's got to leave. All right. So there was strife now, and that sometimes happens. The more high-powered position you get in your job, sometimes when you have just a lowly job, people aren't really paying attention to you, which can be good and can be bad. But once you get higher up there, there's more stress. There are more suicides and more drug addictions from people who are higher up because there's more stress on these people. And so there's strife now, it says in verse 7, between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites that dwelled in the land. There was all this strife, right? Because there's Canaanites there and there's Perizzites, and they're about to eat up all their own grass, and they're gonna have to intrude on these other people. And Abraham has yet to make any acquaintance with anybody else, right? So if we start intruding on their land, they're gonna come after us. So somebody's got to go. Okay. So here's the next lesson that Abraham learns, that if God is on my side, I don't have to guard my own interests. I don't have to be selfish. If God says that he'll provide to me, then I don't have to just look inward and guard everything and keep everything, because I can trust that God will provide. So it makes us generous. We can be a giver because God says, if you give, I'll give back to you. So Abraham in verse 8 says to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen. For we're brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. And if you take the left, then I'll go to the right. Or if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. So he gives the choice, leaves the choice up to Lot. You choose what you want. Now, because he knew, and I'll take whatever he could have said, look, I'm your uncle. So you stay up here in the hills where there's not much, and I'm going to go down in that fertile valley. But he says, no, I'll take whatever, because I trust that God will provide, because that's one thing that he learned. Oh, God's going to provide. God, I look how he provided in Egypt. So verse 10, it says, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. And this is before God had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was like the garden of the Lord. So he looks down and says, that looks much better. I'm going to go there. It was like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zir, which is because Egypt is watered by the Nile, and it was regularly watered. That was so great about the Nile, is that they could count on it daily. And so that land was so fertile. So he looked and said, that's the place to be. Right over there, right next in between Sodom and Gomorrah. That's going to be the best place to go. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. The next lesson, you need to listen to your heart, because your eyes can deceive you. So your eyes may tell you that's the best car to choose, but something says, no, I better take that one. Your car can tell you that's the best house. That, look how incredible it is, but your heart is telling you, no, you should take that one over there. Or that's the best job. I mean, that job is just going to offer much more money, and this one, but something's telling you to take the quote unquote lesser job. You better listen to your heart, because your eyes can deceive you, because you may get to that job and run into a supervisor that just makes you crazy and makes you want to quit. Or you may go to that house that looks so wonderful and it's nothing but plumbing problems and all sorts of issues. You just never know. It can be the year 2000 and you can have a job offer to this incredible job in these twin towers in New York City, or this not quite as good job in Kansas City. And like, which one? And you're thinking, oh, I want to look at this incredible twin towers, and it's a brand new century, and what could happen? And so, and there are people who took jobs in the twin tower, and there are people who didn't. I mean, we hear of stories of people who were on their way, and something said, "Don't go, nah," and they thought, why? Why? So we got to, because God speaks to us, He gives us an instinct. But if we let our eyes and our flesh dictate what happens to us, we may end up choosing the land between Sodom and Gomorrah. So, verse 12 of Genesis chapter 13 says, Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. So he did not know that in advance, but he ended up being neighbors to somebody who was crazy. And so you may think, well, let me buy that house. Those look like such great neighbors. They're up all night doing something. I don't know what it is, but I hear animal sacrifice. But anyway, so you got to be careful. We have to be careful. Next lesson, we also have to see through God's eyes. See through God's eyes. So verse 14, and the Lord said to Abraham after Lot is separated from him. So God keeps speaking to Abraham after he makes the right choice. So God didn't appear to Abraham and say, let Lot. He had already taught him the lesson. And so we got to learn the lesson. I will provide for you. I'll provide for you. Look how I provided for you in Egypt. So once Lot left and he let Lot make the choice, and Abraham didn't know how bad Sodom and Gomorrah was, but he just did the right thing. Sometimes when you go ahead and give up that $20 to that person who's on the side of the road, who is needy, then somebody calls you up and says, hey, I got a $500 check for you. And you go, wow. As soon as I went ahead and gave that offering or gave that thing, look how God blessed me. So once he gave Lot his choice, then God speaks to him and says, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. So he's up on the hill. Lot went down into the valley and took all that green, lush land. Abram was stuck up on the mountaintop where it was more sparse. You've been up on mountains, it's just more sparse. It's not as lush and green. But from there, he could see everything. And God says, I want you to see how I'm seeing. Don't see what the world sees. Don't see what the world is showing you. But I want you to see what I see. For all the land which you see, I'm giving you and your descendants forever. Then he says, and I will make your descendants as like the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the granules and the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise and walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. So the next lesson is to walk with confidence. Start walking now, because you know that God has given this to you. So there's a way that we need to approach things, because God's already saying, don't worry, I've given this to you. That reminds me of an audition I had for a group when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. A friend called up and said, hey, I want you to go with me to this audition. And I said, okay. Now, the reason I said okay, because I'd had a dream the night before that I was at an audition. So even though I had never heard of this particular group, I'd never heard anything about it. I thought, well, I had that dream, so maybe God wants me to do that. So I went to this audition. When I got there, I'm totally unprepared. Got there, people had out their opera books and I've never sung opera, and their portfolio, and they're and they're doing all these run, and and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, what? So, what am I doing here? But I'd had this dream that I was supposed to go to this audition. So I walked in when they finally called on me, and I could hear them in there singing in Italian and singing in German and doing all these incredible things. And I walked in, and something just said, hey, just have confidence, because did I not show you in a dream to go here? So I got up and I did not. So, so I went in and just, I just sang like an old Negro spiritual. They'd all been singing all sorts of stuff. but I did it with confidence. You know, I said, well, what the heck? What have I got to lose? And interestingly, I was one of only 3 people out of those 50 that was there that was actually picked to go. But there was a certain, because the person said, well, you got there, you just sang totally the wrong song, but you sang it with such confidence that I said, this person's interesting. I need to take this person. And actually, that happened on a few auditions where I would just get up and say, well, I'm here. I might as well just go for it. I feel totally outmatched, but I'm going to go for it. And that's what God's telling to Abraham. Walk through the land, its length and its width. So walk through it, just with confidence. In fact, this same place was where he said to Joshua, every place that the sole of your foot treads upon, I have given you. So it's like, just so walk and just know that I've given it, even though it doesn't look like it. It may not look like it. It may like this is a new job or this is a new situation. But walk in with confidence, because no, God says, I've sent you there. I've already spoken to you. I've sent you there. Be confident. So last verse, then Abraham moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth tree of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Now Mamre, this is a different terebinth tree than the one that was of Moreh. That was a different terebinth tree when he first got there, when he was in Shechem. This is the terebinth tree of Mamre. And Mamre is this guy that Abraham became friends with. He becomes acquaintance with this person. And that's happened to you, where you've seen someone and God says, spoke to your heart. Go talk to that person. And then you make this acquaintance and like, oh my God, this is my best friend for the next 30 years. But you didn't know that. And Abraham didn't know that. But Abraham hadn't spoken to a soul other than Lot. And now he's by himself. But he says, go ahead and walk. Be confident, because I've given you this land. So he pitches his tent next to the Mamre's land, and he becomes friends with him. And we'll see in the next chapter how important that was. And what he's a local chieftain there. So in Genesis chapter 14 next week, we'll get to there. But here's an interesting thing in Joshua chapter 1, and I'm just in the last parts of this. Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, he says, haven't I commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Don't be afraid nor dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so we have to understand the unconditional promises of God. If God says, speaking to your heart, says, this is what I'm going to do, then don't be afraid. Then move with confidence. Act like I belong here. I'm supposed to be here. This is my place. And because God has sent me here, even though I don't know anybody or I don't know as much as them, or I'm going to move with confidence, and I'm going to act like this is all going to work out. And so that's what he's trying to get. He's teaching Abraham bit by bit. And it reminds me of what God says to Balak. Balaam, when Balak came to him and wanted him to curse the children of Israel, curse those people. And Balaam says, oh my God. Balaam says to Balak, rise up, Balak, and listen. This is in Numbers chapter 23, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. Listen to me. God is not a man that he should lie, nor the son of man that he should repent or take back what he said. Has he said it? Will he not do it? Has he spoken it, and will he not make it good? Behold, I received a command to bless, and so he has blessed, and I cannot reverse it. So once God has commanded his blessing on your life, once he's commanded his blessing in a place or an activity or something that he's doing, no one can reverse it. You can't reverse it. The blessing is going to happen. And so we need to have that confidence when God has spoken to us. If he said, I want you to go pray for that person, or I want you to go apply for that job, or I want you to do that, even though we may not see right away, or even for a long period of time, the results. It may take a long time for those roots to really take hold in that plant to show up. Just know that if God has said it, he's going to do it, and that nothing can reverse it. Nothing that the devil can do, nothing anybody can do can reverse what God has commanded. He will bless. So we need to take those words with us. And if you are a member of Good Shepherd, or I invite you to listen to my pastor. I remind you again that he's speaking, Reverend Renandus Grimm. And the rest of you who are listening, hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. We're in the book of Matthew, and it's getting good. It's getting good. Stuff's about to fly off the handle. Okay, and thank you again for tuning in today. And remember, if God has spoken to your heart, no man can stop what God is putting in motion. Amen.